Sean Mercer. On August 22, 2007, Liverpool, England became the site of a tragedy that would shock the nation and expose the deadly consequences of gang culture. Sean Mercer, 16 years old, was riding his bicycle through a pub car park in Croxteth when he spotted members of a rival gang. Armed with a Smith & Wesson revolver, he made a split-second decision that would end an innocent life and change his own forever. What he couldn't have known was that his target wasn't his rival at all. But who actually fell that day? And why did this teenager have access to such a weapon? Mercer fired 3 shots across the Fir Tree Pub car park, aiming at members of the rival Norris Green gang. But his aim was off. One bullet struck Rhys Jones, just returning home from football practice, hitting him in the neck. The boy collapsed in the car park while Mercer fled on his bicycle, immediately going into hiding. The entire incident took seconds, but the ripples would last decades. Liverpool's gang warfare had claimed its most innocent victim yet. Born in 1990, Mercer had grown up in Croxteth during a time when gang rivalry between the Croxteth crew and Norris Green gang was escalating to dangerous levels. He had dropped out of school early and become deeply embedded in the Croxteth crew, viewing gang membership as his identity. The territorial disputes had been building for years, with each side retaliating against perceived slights. On that August evening, Mercer was cycling through his territory when he saw what he believed was an opportunity to strike at his enemies. The weapon Mercer used was an antique revolver that had been circulating among gang members. After the incident, he immediately hid the gun and orchestrated a cover-up with associates who helped conceal evidence and provided false alibis. His mother, Jeanette Mercer, even washed his clothes to destroy forensic evidence, an act that would later land her in prison as well. The investigation was massive, with Liverpool police utilizing Crime Watch appeals that generated crucial tips from the community. Rhys's mother, Melanie Jones, made a direct appeal to the perpetrator's mother, asking her to search her conscience. This appeal reportedly prompted witnesses to come forward. Eventually, 17 people were arrested in connection with the case, though Mercer was the only one charged with taking Rhys's life. Mercer's trial took place in 2008 at Liverpool Crown Court, where the prosecution presented CCTV footage, witness testimony, and forensic evidence linking him to the scene. Throughout the trial, Mercer showed no remorse for his actions. The jury convicted him after hearing how this senseless act had destroyed the Jones family. Justice Irwin, in his sentencing remarks, told the gang members in court that they were not soldiers and had no discipline, training, or honor. Mercer was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 22 years, adjusted for time already served on remand. His mother, Jeanette, received a 3-year sentence for perverting the course of justice. In 2020, Mercer attempted to have his minimum term reduced, but this was denied, with the family of Rhys Jones strongly opposing any leniency. His mother was re-jailed in 2023 for additional offenses. As of 2025, Mercer remains incarcerated in a UK prison facility, with his earliest possible release date in 2029. The case led to the establishment of gang prevention centers in Liverpool and continues to serve as a stark reminder of how territorial disputes can destroy innocent lives. Rhys Jones's family has never stopped advocating for awareness about gang culture's devastating impact. While gang warfare claimed one life, the next case would see an entire family targeted from within. Jeffrey Franklin. On January 26, 1998, Huntsville, Alabama became the scene of a family nightmare that no one could have predicted. Jeffrey Franklin, 17 years old, lived with his parents Gerald and Cynthia and his 3 siblings in what appeared to be a typical suburban household. But beneath the surface, Jeffrey was spiraling into a dark mental state, one that his writings would later reveal in chilling detail. On that January morning, he would take actions that would leave 2 people deceased and 3 others fighting for their lives. What signs had been missed? And what drove this teenager to turn on his own family? Franklin attacked his sleeping family using multiple weapons, including a sledgehammer, hatchet, and metal file. He moved through the house methodically, targeting his parents first before turning on his siblings. His father Gerald and mother Cynthia were found deceased, while his 3 siblings survived their injuries despite the severity of the attack. The scene was one of complete chaos, with investigators struggling to comprehend how a teenager could commit such acts against his own family. Born in 1981, Franklin had been prescribed Ritalin for attention issues, but he had been taking it in doses far exceeding what was prescribed. Writings found in his room revealed disturbing content, including references to dark themes and detailed plans that suggested premeditation. He had written about his intentions, describing scenarios that would later play out almost exactly as written. The writings also revealed his interest in causing harm to his family, particularly targeting certain family members. The attack was discovered when a neighbor spotted Franklin covered in blood outside the house. When police arrived, Franklin fled in a vehicle, leading to a high-speed chase through Huntsville. The chase ended when he crashed the vehicle, at which point he was taken into custody. His demeanor during arrest was described as oddly calm, showing little emotional response to what had just occurred. During the investigation, prosecutors examined whether Franklin's Ritalin misuse had induced a psychotic state or whether his actions stemmed from something more inherent. Franklin himself would later claim that the excessive Ritalin had caused him to act in ways he wouldn't normally, stating he wasn't really a bad person and that it just happened. However, prosecutors argued his detailed writings proved he knew exactly what he was doing. Rather than face trial, Franklin pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty, receiving 5 concurrent life sentences for taking the lives of his parents and harming his siblings. His surviving siblings have had to live with the physical and emotional scars from that morning, forever changed by their brother's actions. The family's tragedy sparked discussions about prescription monitoring and warning signs in teenagers. Franklin has claimed remorse in the years since, attributing his actions to the influence of substances rather than his true nature. In 2022, he was denied parole after a hearing where the severity of his crimes was reconsidered. He remains in a mental health unit within the Alabama prison system, where he receives ongoing psychiatric treatment. As of 2025, Franklin is still incarcerated and will remain eligible for future parole hearings, though approval remains unlikely given the nature of his offenses. The horror of family destruction would pale in comparison to what the next case revealed about predatory behavior. Cody Legibokoff. On November 27, 2010, Prince George, British Columbia became the center of a major investigation when RCMP officers conducted a routine traffic stop on a truck driving erratically near the city limits. The driver was Cody Allen Legibokoff, 20 years old, who appeared nervous during the stop. When officers searched his vehicle, they discovered evidence that would connect him to 4 separate cases, spanning more than a year, earning him the grim title of Canada's youngest convicted individual in such a category. How did this young man from a small Canadian city become connected to multiple cases across the region? Officers found items belonging to Loren Leslie, a teenager whose remains had been discovered earlier that day, inside Legibokoff's truck. They also found tools with biological evidence on them. This discovery opened an investigation that would eventually connect Legibokoff to 3 additional cases: Jill Stuchenko, 35 years old, Natasha Montgomery, 23, and Cynthia Moss, 35. All 4 individuals had been found in remote areas around Prince George between 2009 and 2010. Natasha Montgomery's remains were never recovered, though DNA evidence placed her in Legabokoff's apartment. Born on January 21, 1990, in Fort St. James, British Columbia, Legabokoff had grown up playing ice hockey and was described as popular with no obvious signs of tendencies during his teenage years. After graduating, he moved to Prince George, where he worked at a Ford dealership and shared an apartment with roommates. On the surface, he appeared to be a typical young man starting his adult life. However, beneath this exterior, he had developed an addiction to cocaine that would drive his actions. During the investigation, it became clear that Legabokoff had been targeting vulnerable individuals, many of whom were involved in street activities. He used these encounters to obtain substances to feed his addiction. The cases involved significant planning, with Legabokoff transporting individuals to remote locations where he knew they wouldn't be easily found. The brutality of the acts shocked even experienced investigators who had worked numerous cases. The families of the deceased spoke about the vulnerabilities their loved ones had faced. Several of the individuals had indigenous backgrounds, connecting their cases to the broader Highway of Tears phenomenon in British Columbia, where numerous indigenous women and others have disappeared or been found deceased along Highway 16. This context added another layer of tragedy to the already devastating situation. Legabokoff's trial took place in 2014 at the BC Supreme Court, where he attempted to claim others were involved in the acts. However, DNA evidence, witness testimony, and physical evidence from his truck and apartment painted a clear picture of his sole responsibility. During proceedings, he showed a disturbing lack of empathy, at one point making inappropriate comments that shocked the courtroom. When asked about activities found on his property, he casually stated he was a redneck, and that's what they do for fun. Justice Glenn Parrott, in his sentencing remarks, noted that Legabokoff lacked any shred of empathy or remorse, stating he should never be allowed to walk among the community again. Legabokoff was convicted on 4 counts of first-degree responsibility and sentenced to life imprisonment without eligibility for parole for 25 years, the harshest sentence available under Canadian law at that time. He was also placed on the National Registry for such offenders. An appeal was filed in 2016, but was denied. As of 2025, Legabokoff is incarcerated at a medium-security facility in Ontario, a move that generated controversy and was described by victim advocates as a slap in the face. He won't be eligible to apply for parole until 2035. A documentary about his case was released recently, reigniting discussions about his acts and their impact on the community. From Canada's remote highways, the next case would take us into the halls of an American school, John Odgren. On January 19, 2007, Lincoln's Sudbury Regional High School in Massachusetts became the scene of an incomprehensible act during what should have been an ordinary school day. John Odgren, 16 years old, encountered a fellow student in a second-floor bathroom during passing period. What happened next would end one life, destroy another, and spark debates about mental health, youth responsibility, and the justice system's treatment of teenagers with developmental conditions. What could drive a student to commit such an act in a school bathroom with no apparent provocation? Odgren attacked 15-year-old James Allenson with a knife, causing fatal injuries in the school bathroom. There was no clear relationship between the two students and no apparent motive. Allenson was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Odgren was discovered at the scene and immediately arrested by school resource officers, still in a state of shock. His first words upon realization of what he had done were reported as asking what he had just done, suggesting he didn't fully comprehend his own actions. Born in 1990, Odgren had been diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome and had experienced difficulties in social situations throughout his childhood. He had been the target of peer harassment at previous schools, which had contributed to his social isolation. His parents had enrolled him at Lincoln Sudbury, hoping the environment would be better for him. He had expressed interest in forensic psychology and had read extensively about criminal cases, though whether this influenced his actions remained a point of debate. The defense argued that Oddgren's Asperger's syndrome had caused a psychotic break, rendering him unable to understand right from wrong at the moment of the act. They presented expert testimony about how his condition could have impaired his judgment and impulse control. The prosecution, however, argued that his extensive reading about criminal cases showed he understood the nature and consequences of such acts, making him criminally responsible. The trial took place in 2010 and lasted several weeks, with both sides presenting dueling expert witnesses about Oddgren's mental state. The jury ultimately rejected the insanity defense, finding him guilty of first-degree intentional harm. The verdict was controversial, with mental health advocates arguing that the justice system had failed to adequately consider his developmental challenges. Allinson's family, while sympathetic to Oddgren's condition, maintained that justice required accountability. Oddgren was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a mandatory sentence in Massachusetts for first-degree convictions. His legal team filed multiple appeals, arguing that sentencing someone with his developmental challenges to life without parole was excessive and failed to consider his reduced culpability due to his condition. These appeals highlighted broader questions about how the justice system should treat young offenders with mental health or developmental issues. His most recent appeal was denied in 2019, with courts finding that while his condition was a factor, it didn't negate his criminal responsibility. As of 2025, Oddgren remains in a Massachusetts prison facility where he receives ongoing mental health treatment. The debate over mental health would continue into the next case, which involved planning that shocked investigators. Austin Sigg. On October 5, 2012, Westminster, Colorado became the focus of a massive search after a 10-year-old girl named Jessica Ridgway failed to arrive at school. Jessica had been walking to meet friends for the short walk to school when she disappeared from her neighborhood. The community mobilized immediately, with hundreds of volunteers searching the area. What they didn't know was that the person responsible was a 17-year-old living nearby, who had been planning for such an opportunity. What led a teenage boy to commit such a calculated and disturbing act? Jessica's remains were discovered days later in a field in Arvada, several miles from where she had disappeared. The condition of the remains shocked investigators and indicated significant planning and premeditation. Evidence collected from the scene would eventually lead investigators to Austin Sigg, a 17-year-old who lived in Jessica's neighborhood and had been following the news coverage of the search with apparent interest. Born in 1995, Sigg had developed a serious addiction to explicit and harmful content found online. His mother, Mindy Sigg, would later reflect on the guilt she carried, wondering what signs she had missed. Austin had been a student at Arapahoe Community College and had appeared to be a typical teenager to those who knew him casually. However, his internet history revealed a disturbing descent into increasingly extreme material that had warped his thinking. The break in the case came when Sigg himself called authorities and confessed, providing details only the perpetrator would know. He told investigators where they could find evidence and gave a full account of his actions. The confession shocked both law enforcement and the community, who had been hoping Jessica would be found safe. Sigg's willingness to confess suggested some level of understanding that what he had done was wrong, though his lack of emotional response was disturbing. During the investigation, authorities also connected Sigg to an attack on a jogger that had occurred months earlier in May 2012. The jogger had managed to escape after being grabbed, and the similarities in approach led investigators to link both incidents. This suggested Sig had been building up to his actions against Jessica, starting with a failed attempt before succeeding months later. Sig pleaded guilty in 2013 to avoid a trial that would have been devastating for Jessica's family. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 40 years, meaning he would be 57 before becoming eligible. The sentence was the maximum available under Colorado law for someone who committed such acts as a juvenile. Jessica's family members spoke at the sentencing about the permanent hole left in their lives and their struggle to comprehend how someone could target their daughter. In 2025, Sig remains in an undisclosed Colorado facility. His mother, Mindy Sig, gave an interview reflecting on the guilt she carries and the therapy she has undergone to process being the mother of someone who committed such acts. She spoke about the warning signs she wishes she had recognized and encouraged other parents to monitor their children's online activity closely. While planning marked the previous case, the next would be driven by ideology and hatred. Peyton Gendron. On May 14, 2022, Buffalo, New York became the site of a targeted act of hatred at a Tops Friendly Market supermarket. Peyton Gendron, 18 years old, drove 3 hours from his home in Conklin specifically to target this location in a predominantly black neighborhood. Armed with tactical gear and weapons, he entered the store with the explicit intent to harm as many black individuals as possible. The attack would claim 10 lives and injure 3 others, becoming one of the deadliest acts of racially motivated hatred in recent American history. How does an 18-year-old become so consumed by supremacist ideology that he commits an act of this magnitude? Gendron had spent months planning the attack, creating detailed documents outlining his extremist beliefs and his intentions. He had been radicalized online, spending time in forums where white supremacist ideology was shared and reinforced. His manifesto, which he posted online before the attack, cited replacement theory, conspiracy theories, and expressed hatred toward black people, Jewish people, and immigrants. He had even scouted the location weeks earlier to plan his approach. On that Saturday afternoon, Gendron arrived at the supermarket wearing tactical gear and carrying weapons. He began his attack in the parking lot before moving inside the store. A security guard, Aaron Salter, attempted to stop him, but was shot. Gendron continued through the store, deliberately targeting black shoppers while sparing white ones. He live-streamed the attack online, showing the premeditated and hateful nature of his actions. The entire incident lasted minutes, but left the community devastated. Born in 2004, Gendron had grown up in a small town in upstate New York. He had been a student who showed concerning signs, including a school threat incident in 2021, where he was briefly hospitalized for a mental health evaluation. However, no long-term interventions were implemented. His online activity had been growing more extreme, but this radicalization happened largely in isolation, with his parents unaware of the depth of his hatred. The investigation revealed the extent of Gendron's planning. He had modified his weapons, studied previous attacks, and specifically chosen his target to maximize casualties among black people. The FBI classified it as a hate crime and an act of racially motivated terrorism. The Buffalo community, particularly the black community that had been targeted, expressed grief, anger, and demands for accountability, not just for Gendron, but for the online platforms that had facilitated his radicalization. Gendron pleaded guilty to state charges in 2022, receiving a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole on multiple counts. He apologized during his statement, saying he was sorry for the pain he caused. But many viewed his apology as hollow, given the calculated nature of his actions. Federal charges were also filed, seeking the potential for additional penalties, with prosecutors arguing the severity of the hate crime warranted the harshest possible consequences. As of 2025, Gendron is in federal custody awaiting additional proceedings scheduled for 2026. If you've made it this far and enjoyed deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. From ideological hatred, the next case would show how personal relationships can turn deadly. William Riley Gall. On November 21st, 2016, Knoxville, Tennessee became the scene of a tragedy that began with a teenage romance gone wrong. Emma Walker, a 16-year-old cheerleader at Central High School, was sleeping in her bedroom when shots were fired through her wall from outside. One bullet struck her while she slept, ending her life instantly. The perpetrator was her ex-boyfriend, William Riley Gall, 18, who couldn't accept that their relationship was over and had been escalating his behavior in the weeks leading up to that November night. How did a high school relationship spiral into such a tragic and calculated act? Gall had been dating Emma for about 2 years before their relationship ended in the fall of 2016. Emma had become concerned about his controlling behavior and decided to break things off. However, Gall refused to accept the breakup, engaging in increasingly concerning actions to try to win her back or stay in her life. He created fake social media accounts to contact her, sent her messages claiming someone was threatening him, and even staged a kidnapping scenario to gain her sympathy and attention. In the days before Emma's passing, Gall's behavior became more erratic. He tried to convince Emma's friends that she was in danger, hoping this would drive her back to him for protection. He sent alarming messages and made concerning statements that, in retrospect, were clear warning signs of his deteriorating mental state. Emma's mother, Jill Walker, had been growing increasingly worried about Gall's refusal to move on and his persistent contact attempts. On the night of November 20, Gall took his grandfather's handgun and went to Emma's house in the middle of the night. He positioned himself outside and fired multiple shots through the wall of her bedroom, knowing where her bed was positioned. Emma's mother discovered her the next morning, and the devastation was immediate. The community was shocked that such an act could occur in their suburban neighborhood. Initially, Gall tried to deflect suspicion by acting devastated about Emma's passing and even attending a vigil in her honor. However, investigators quickly focused on him due to his history with Emma and his recent concerning behavior. The breakthrough came when Gall's friends agreed to cooperate with investigators and wore recording devices during conversations with him. During one of these recorded conversations, Gall made incriminating statements and eventually led them to where he had disposed of the weapon. One of his friends exclaimed during the recovery of the weapon, expressing shock that it was real. The recordings captured Gall's admissions about his actions, providing crucial evidence for prosecutors. He was arrested and charged with first-degree intentional harm, with prosecutors arguing the act was premeditated and calculated. The evidence of his stalking behavior, the staged incidents, and his detailed knowledge of Emma's bedroom location all pointed to significant planning. Gall's trial took place in 2018, where his friends testified about his behavior and the recordings were played for the jury. Emma's family spoke about their daughter's bright future that had been stolen, her cheerleading ambitions, and the terror of finding her that morning. The prosecution presented a clear picture of a young man who couldn't handle rejection and chose to eliminate what he couldn't control. The jury convicted Gall of first-degree responsibility, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 51 years. This means he would be 69 years old before becoming eligible for parole. The sentence reflected both the premeditated nature of his act and his age at the time. Emma's family established a scholarship in her name to honor her memory and keep her spirit alive in the community. In July 2025, Gall filed a petition asking the court to reconsider his sentence. arguing it was excessive. A hearing was scheduled to review his request, though Emma's family has strongly opposed any reduction in his sentence. As of 2025, he remains in a Tennessee prison facility. His case has been used in educational programs about recognizing warning signs of dangerous relationships and the importance of taking stalking behavior seriously. Another case would involve a classroom, a teacher, and years of hidden resentment. Will Cornick. On April 28, 2014, Corpus Christi Catholic College in Leeds, England, experienced an unthinkable act during what should have been an ordinary Spanish class. Will Cornick, 15, had been sitting in Anne Maguire's classroom when he suddenly stood up and attacked the beloved teacher with a weapon, inflicting multiple injuries in front of horrified classmates. Anne Maguire, 61, had taught at the school for decades and was just months away from retirement. Her students watched in shock as their classmate committed an act that would traumatize the entire school community. What could cause a student to harbor such hatred for a teacher that he would plan such an act for years? Cornick had been planning this act for at least 3 years, according to evidence found after his arrest. He had told multiple classmates about his intentions, even showing some of them internet searches about ways to cause harm. However, none of these students reported his threats to adults, later saying they didn't believe he was serious or didn't want to get him in trouble. This failure to report would become a central point in the subsequent investigation into how the tragedy could have been prevented. Born in 1998, Cornick had experienced a personality shift around age 13 after being diagnosed with diabetes. Teachers and family members noticed changes in his behavior, including increased isolation and darker moods. He began engaging in self-harm and developed what he later described as a deep hatred for Mrs. Maguire, though the exact reason for targeting her specifically remained unclear. Some suggested she had been strict with him academically, but this hardly explained the depth of his animosity. On that April morning, Cornick carried out his long-planned attack in front of approximately 30 students. Mrs. Maguire was helping students with their work when Cornick approached from behind and struck her 7 times. Other teachers rushed to the classroom after hearing screams, and Cornick was immediately restrained and arrested on site. Mrs. Maguire received emergency medical treatment, but passed away from her injuries. In the aftermath, students came forward about Cornick's previous statements regarding his intentions. He had allegedly told them he wanted to become infamous and that he planned to target additional teachers after Mrs. Maguire. Facebook messages were recovered where he had discussed his plans in disturbing detail. When arrested, his demeanor was chillingly calm, and he later stated that everything was fine and dandy, showing no remorse for what he had done. The investigation revealed multiple missed opportunities to prevent the tragedy. An inquest later found that warning signs had been present but not acted upon. Cornick's concerning statements to peers, his internet searches, and his behavioral changes all should have triggered interventions. The school faced criticism for not having better protocols for students to report concerning behavior from their classmates. Cornick pleaded guilty to intentional harm in 2014 and was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 20 years. The judge noted the premeditated nature of the act and his lack of remorse. Mrs. Maguire's family spoke about the devastating loss of a woman who had dedicated her life to teaching and helping young people. Her husband and daughters described her as having the heart of a lioness, strong and protective of all her students. The case sparked debates about juvenile sentencing in the UK and whether someone so young should receive such a lengthy sentence. However, advocates argued that the planning involved and the lack of remorse demonstrated he posed a significant danger, As of 2025, Cornick remains in a UK prison facility, where he will be eligible for parole consideration in 2034 when he turns 35. The school has implemented new protocols for threat reporting, and Mrs. McGuire's legacy lives on through scholarships established in her name. While a grudge motivated the previous case, the next would be driven by something far darker from decades past. Peter Woodcock. Between September 1956 and January 1957, Toronto, Canada was terrorized by a series of attacks on young children that shocked the community to its core. The perpetrator was Peter Woodcock, 17, who targeted vulnerable children in separate incidents across the city. His acts were so disturbing that even experienced investigators struggled to process the scenes. What made the case even more troubling was Woodcock's complete lack of understanding of why his actions were wrong, revealing a level of psychopathy that would puzzle experts for decades. How does someone so young develop such a complete absence of moral understanding? Woodcock's first known victim was 7-year-old Wayne Millett in September 1956, whom he lured away and took to a secluded area. The attack was brutal and involved ritualistic elements that suggested deep psychological disturbance. In November 1956, he targeted 9-year-old Gary Morris in a similar manner. His final victim in this series was 4-year-old Carol Voice in January 1957. Each case showed escalating brutality and increasingly disturbing behavior patterns. Born in 1939, Woodcock had experienced severe rejection and mistreatment in his earliest years, spending time in foster homes where he endured physical harm. By age 3, he was described as terrified of people and exhibiting unusual behaviors. He was later adopted into what appeared to be a stable family. But the damage from his early experiences had already been done. By age 11, he was having fantasies that would eventually manifest in his acts. The investigation into the Toronto cases was extensive, with police following numerous leads. Tragically, one innocent man was wrongfully arrested for Wayne Millett's case before the true perpetrator was identified. A composite sketch based on witness descriptions eventually led investigators to Woodcock, who confessed when confronted. He told investigators he had feared his foster mother's reaction to what he had done, showing his warped understanding of consequences. Woodcock was tried only for Carol Voice's case in 1957 and was found not guilty by reason of insanity. Rather than going to prison, he was sent to a psychiatric facility where doctors attempted various treatments over the decades, including experimental therapies that were controversial even at the time. These included LSD therapy and an approach called dyads, where patients worked through their issues together. None of these interventions successfully addressed his psychopathy. In 1991, after 34 of institutionalization, Woodcock was granted his first day pass to leave the facility with another patient. On that very first day of supervised freedom, he committed another act, this time targeting fellow inmate Dennis Kerr with help from his companion. The attack was brutal and sexual in nature, showing that decades of treatment had done nothing to address his fundamental lack of empathy. He and his accomplice turned themselves in afterward. In an interview years later, Woodcock stated he was accused of having no morality, which he called a fair assessment. This chilling self-awareness, combined with his inability to change, made him one of Canada's most studied cases of psychopathy. He remained in psychiatric custody for the rest of his life, never showing genuine remorse or understanding of the pain he had caused multiple families. Woodcock passed away in 2010 while still in custody, having spent more than 50 years institutionalized. From decades past to more recent times, the next case would involve a relationship turned controlling. Thomas Griffiths. On May 3, 2019, Calne, Wiltshire, in England, became the site of a tragedy involving two teenagers whose relationship had recently ended. Thomas Griffiths, 17, drove to the home of his ex-girlfriend, Ellie Gould, during her lunch break from school. What should have been a brief encounter turned into an act that would devastate two families and spark a campaign for legal reform. Ellie's mother would later discover the horrific scene when she returned home that afternoon. Why couldn't this teenager accept that his relationship was over? Griffiths attacked Ellie in her own kitchen, inflicting 13 separate injuries. After the attack, in a calculated move to deflect suspicion, he attempted to stage the scene to make it appear as though Ellie had harmed herself. He placed a weapon in her hand and positioned her body in a way he hoped would support this narrative. He then returned to school, attending his afternoon classes as if nothing had happened. Born in 2001, Griffiths had appeared to be a typical student with no obvious red flags to teachers or casual acquaintances. However, his relationship with Ellie had shown signs of coercive control that would later be examined in detail. The couple had been together but broke up, with Ellie deciding to end things. Griffiths had struggled with this decision and had been trying to maintain contact despite her desire to move on. His behavior in the days before the incident showed increasing desperation to restore the relationship. Ellie's mother, Carol Gould, found her daughter when she returned home from work that afternoon. The initial scene appeared to support the staging Griffiths had attempted, but investigators quickly recognized inconsistencies. The positioning didn't match typical patterns, and forensic evidence told a different story. Defense wounds on Ellie's hands indicated she had fought back against an attacker. Cell phone data placed Griffiths at the house during the time frame of her passing. When confronted with the evidence, Griffiths' staged narrative fell apart. He was arrested and charged with intentional harm. During the investigation, messages were found that revealed the controlling aspects of his personality and his inability to accept the relationship's end. Friends and family members came forward with information about his behavior following the breakup, painting a picture of someone who became obsessed with what he had lost. Griffiths pleaded guilty in November 2019, avoiding a trial that would have been devastating for both families. He received a life sentence with a minimum term of 12.5 years before parole eligibility. He wrote a letter expressing what he called heartfelt remorse, though many questioned the sincerity given his attempts to cover up his actions. The relatively short minimum term sparked controversy, with many feeling it didn't adequately reflect the severity of taking Ellie's life. Ellie's mother, Carol Gould, became a powerful advocate for legal reform, working to change how cases involving controlling behavior were handled in the UK justice system. Her campaign, along with efforts from other families who had lost loved ones in similar circumstances, led to changes in sentencing guidelines and greater recognition of coercive control as a factor in such cases. The campaign became known as Ellie's Law. For her advocacy work, Carol Gould was honored with an OBE in recognition of her efforts to prevent similar tragedies. As of 2025, Griffiths remains in a UK prison facility, serving his sentence. He will be eligible for parole consideration in the early 2030s. Ellie's legacy lives on through the legal changes inspired by her case and her mother's tireless advocacy work to protect others from similar situations. If one teenager could cause such devastation, the next case would show what two brothers could do together. Michael Baver. On July 22, 2015, Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, became the site of a family massacre that shocked the nation with its brutality and the age of the perpetrators. Michael Baver, 16, and his older brother Robert, 18, attacked their own family in their home that evening, targeting their parents and siblings in a rampage that left 5 deceased and 2 survivors. The brothers had been planning the attack for weeks, discussing their intentions in detail and gathering supplies. Their stated goal was to commit a mass act that would make them famous. How could 2 brothers plan and execute such acts against their own family? The attack began around 11:30 p.m., when the brothers armed themselves and moved through their house targeting family members. Their parents, David and April Bever, were attacked first, followed by their younger siblings. The scene was one of complete horror, with the brothers showing no hesitation as they carried out their plan. 2 siblings managed to survive. One called 911 during the attack, and another, Crystal, hid and witnessed parts of the tragedy. Born in 1998, Michael had been homeschooled along with his siblings in a reclusive household where the parents maintained strict control and limited outside contact. There were later allegations of mistreatment within the home, though the extent of this was debated. Michael and Robert had become increasingly isolated, spending time online and developing fantasies about committing acts that would make them notorious. They discussed plans to continue their rampage beyond their family, targeting other locations to maximize casualties. The brothers had created detailed plans, including what to do with the remains of their family members and how they would film their subsequent attacks. They were inspired by other mass incidents and wanted to surpass them in scope. Their goal was twisted fame, believing that notoriety would give their lives meaning. This thrill-seeking motivation made their case particularly disturbing, as there was no personal grudge or clear reason for targeting their own family beyond opportunity. The 911 call from one of the siblings alerted police, who arrived to find the brothers fleeing the scene. They were apprehended quickly in a wooded area behind the house. Inside, officers found the devastating scene, with 5 deceased family members and 2 traumatized survivors. The surviving siblings, particularly Crystal, would have to testify about what they witnessed and endured, reliving the horror in court proceedings. The brothers were charged separately. Robert, being 18, was charged as an adult immediately and received multiple life sentences without parole. Michael's case was more complex due to his age. His trial took place in 2018, where prosecutors presented evidence of his active participation in planning and executing the attack. His defense attempted to argue he had been influenced by his older brother, but evidence showed Michael had been an equal participant. Michael was convicted and received 5 life sentences with the possibility of parole, meaning he could potentially be released after serving minimum terms. He showed no remorse during his trial, maintaining a cold demeanor throughout proceedings. Crystal Bever, the surviving sibling who testified, showed remarkable strength in recounting her experience and advocating for justice for her family. As of 2025, Michael remains in an Oklahoma prison facility. The 10-year anniversary of the tragedy in 2025 brought renewed attention to the case, with the Broken Arrow community reflecting on the trauma that still affects them. From brothers acting together, the final case would involve a single teenager and a disturbing fixation. Stephen Miles. On May 7, 2014, Oxted, Surrey in England became the site of a tragedy involving 2 teenagers whose relationship had taken a dark turn. Stephen Miles, 16, had been dating Elizabeth Thomas, 17, for several months. On that May evening, Miles took Elizabeth's life in her own home, then engaged in acts that shocked investigators with their brutality and clear planning. The case would reveal Miles's obsession with a television series and how his struggles with mental health had manifested in the most devastating way. What role did media influence play in this teenager's descent into such horrific actions? Miles attacked Elizabeth in her bedroom before dismembering her remains in an attempt to dispose of the evidence. The level of planning and the nature of his actions suggested significant premeditation rather than a spontaneous act. He had watched and rewatched episodes of the television show Dexter, which features a protagonist who leads a double life and disposes of remains in similar ways. Miles had become fixated on the show to an unhealthy degree. Born in 1997, Miles showed signs of autism spectrum disorder and struggled with anxiety throughout his childhood and teenage years. He described hearing a voice he called Ed, which he later explained was a manifestation of his anxiety rather than actual auditory experiences. He claimed Ed told him what to do and influenced his actions, though psychological evaluations determined he understood right from wrong and was not experiencing psychosis that would negate criminal responsibility. Miles and Elizabeth had been in a relationship that appeared normal to outsiders. But Miles had been growing increasingly troubled. The combination of his mental health struggles, his isolation, and his immersion in media that depicted harmful acts created a dangerous situation. On the day of the incident, Miles went to Elizabeth's home where her family members were also present. What exactly triggered the specific timing of his actions remained unclear. After the act, Miles was found at the scene by police and immediately arrested. He told his sister that Ed had made him do something bad, attempting to deflect responsibility onto this manifestation of his anxiety. During questioning, he referenced the television show repeatedly, showing how it had influenced his thinking and actions. His detailed knowledge of disposal methods from the show was evident in what he had attempted to miss. The investigation revealed the extent of Miles's obsession with Dexter and how he had been consuming the content compulsively. Mental health experts evaluated him to determine if his autism and anxiety disorders had impaired his ability to understand his actions. Ultimately, they concluded that while these conditions affected his development and thinking patterns, he had the capacity to know what he was doing was wrong and could control his actions. Miles pleaded guilty to intentional harm in 2014, accepting responsibility for his actions. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 25 years before becoming eligible for parole. As of 2025, Miles remains in a UK prison facility where he continues to receive mental health treatment. He won't be eligible for parole consideration until 2039, when he will be 42 years old. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video